Started. Everybody's ready. So welcome back, everyone. Tonight we will be looking at the preface or preface, or however you all want to say that, the preface pages. And just a reminder, please raise your virtual hand if you have a question or want to make a comment or whatever. If you have a question that can't wait till the PowerPoint is finished, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll try to take a quick question if that comes up. Because I know sometimes for me, if I don't ask it right away, I forget the question. But so if you need to, go ahead and do that. So in the 12-step workshops, we don't spend a whole lot of time dwelling on our personal stories because doing so anchors us in the past and it fosters a bondage of self and hinders our spiritual growth. So it's strongly emphasized that focusing on our past narratives, whether of addiction or trauma, it perpetuates the spiritual malady of selfishness and resentment, and it prevents the experience of a new life of being free. So working within the 12-step process brings a profound spiritual awakening rather than relying on narratives that lead us back into our own past dysfunctional behaviors. So while the story helps identify the problem initially, it is the application of the 12 steps that produces the recovery. And as you can see in the PowerPoint, if you're having a specific issue with a with your addiction related problems, definitely reach out to your sponsor, or if you have a therapist, or if you have a specific group that you go to. Because I don't want people to think that this is a regular let's share kind of meeting. It's really not. This is about the solution and it's about doing the work. So if you feel like you really need to share, I recommend that you find like your typical once a week meeting or whatever. So the 12 step set aside prayer, it's widely believed to have originated from the circuit speaker Joe Hawk. He was from Santa Monica, California. And he really used it a lot in his talks and he really popularized it. It's not formally printed in the original AA Big Book. It was inspired, though, by the principles in the doctor's opinion and also to the agnostics. That's pages 46 to 48. And it encourages open-mindedness and setting aside prejudices, which we generally all are guilty of. So if you'd like to say the prayer with me, God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, my spiritual path, and you for an open mind and an open heart with myself, my unmanageability, and especially with you. So this is just a little reminder as we continue to go through all this information. It's a lot of information and it's a lot to keep in your head. But as you're going through the workshop, try to remember to ask yourself some of these questions. Where is my life not working? How effective are my efforts? Do I really want my life to change? What changes would I like to see? And what is the invitation? So just a reminder to keep you guys reminded to remind yourselves. That's a triple reminder. So in-depth work, such as this workshop, it needs a lot of attention, and this is very in-depth work. So listening to the video a second time helps the information stick better if you have the time to do that. If you don't, that's okay too. While listening, watching, or reading, remember it needs to be done actively, meaning we purposely get engaged with the new information and we think about the questions that are being brought up in each class. Write them down if that helps so you can think about them or answer them at a better time. But, I don't want you to be reading your book and all that, but if you're going to write down some notes or some ideas or questions, definitely do that. And people are more likely to learn new information if they ask themselves, what did I just hear? What did she just say? I need to make sure I heard that right. And we can also ask ourselves, is this making sense to me? Can I define all the keywords used properly? Do I need to look up a word or two? Or maybe I have assumed something means a particular thing when it actually doesn't. So we need to understand what we have heard in order to use the information properly. So if anything doesn't sit right, please ask. Do not hesitate to raise your hand. There are no stupid questions ever. And then you might have to ask again, what did that mean? What do you think it means? Does your definition make sense in regards to the particular topic? Are other people's comments not making sense based on your evaluation of what you just heard? That's a pretty good indicator that you might have heard something wrong. If people are responding and you're going, how does that apply to what was just said? We need to bring it back and say, okay, did I hear it right? And how does this information apply to me? Can I be specific in those thoughts? Does it match up with how I'm feeling? Does it reflect the experiences I have already had? We need to be specific. And finally, what was my experience? We need a bit of self-awareness for taking in foreign ideas because we are usually thinking about ourselves anyways, not in a self-centered way, but in a way of caring for ourselves. So when I read my big book, I ask myself, what did Bill mean by that? What is Bill trying to tell me in depth, not just the surface information? If it doesn't make sense to me, I can Google it, and often I will reread it again and sometimes a third time. My brain naturally fights me when it expects I'm about to hijack it. So I ask myself, what is my take on what is being said here? How does this fit into my collective understanding? Does it ring true? Does it sound familiar? We don't have to just assume everything applies to us because not everything does apply to everyone, at least not in the degree of how it applies. So we don't have to just take on everything. We can question it. We can ask, what is my experience? So this is a picture about addiction and the concept that people change for two main reasons. Number one, for great love, or number two, for great suffering. This is a popular, profound reflection on human transformation. This concept highlights that true, lasting change really happens in a state of comfort, unfortunately. When it is for great love, this catalyst involves growth, inspiration, and enlightenment. People change when they want a better way, to learn new information, or are inspired by love or driven by purpose. A shift in perspective occurs by opening our mind to new ideas and possibilities. This change is proactive, driven by a desire to be better for oneself or for another. Love can act as a catalyst when the need to improve one's life builds better habits or becomes a better partner as the pressing issue. If we choose number two, the great suffering, this catalyst involves great pain, trauma, necessity, or disillusionment. People change when the pain of suffering or the pain of staying becomes greater than the pain of changing. Often, heartbreak, loss, betrayal, or failure force a person to reevaluate their lives. The breaking point happens when someone has been hurt enough that they have to change. Resilience and survival are strong motivators, and while painful, This type of change can build deep resilience and lead to stronger personal boundaries and relationships. We change only when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. Consequences are often the push we need to move forward. 95% of people will choose great suffering over great love in order to change. And that doesn't mean every little change that you make. That means when you make the big decision, such as I'm going to go into the program, I'm going to stop using my addictions, and I'm going to try to become a different person. It's not, oh, I think I'll wear a different pair of shoes. It's on that bigger, broader sense. And addiction is the catalyst of our suffering. It's a blessing and a curse because when I start, I cannot stop. And when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. There are two common distinctions about addiction. One is substance, and the second is the processes. Substance is the type of addiction that involves the compulsive use of substances like alcohol, nicotine, drugs, sugar, food, etc. Process addictions are behavioral, which include gambling, shopping, over or under eating, sexual deviance, internet use, video games, and many more. In fact, there's new ones coming about all the time with all this progress that we're making as human beings. Behavioral addictions may or may not involve physical withdrawal symptoms like substance addictions, but they can be just as disruptive and harmful. The 12 steps method has been successfully utilized in treating all forms of addiction and brokenness in our world. Bill said, besides, our way of living may have its advantages for all people, meaning one doesn't have to have an addiction issue to apply the peace that the 12 steps offers. So here's Bill with one of his actual pages. Chapter 5 was one of his favorites, but this is his actual handwriting and an excerpt from the book he was writing, the big book. And when he published the first edition, it was kind of prophetic. He knew consciously that the root of addiction is a human condition. So yes, it was totally developed for active alcoholics. But Bill did have some idea that it would also be applied to drug users as well. He had his intuition and his Oxford group experience that showed him that this is a spiritual exercise for the conversion of a suffering human being, whether alcohol addicted or not, meaning anyone who is suffering from unmanageability in their lives would also experience many of the benefits. Although alcoholism is a disease of the body, mind, and will, he put a lot of effort into step 4 in chapter 5 when talking about unmanageability as the spiritual malady and as the problem. And he was very clear on this in 1939, as we can see here in Bill's own handwriting. He wanted to get it just right. Which brings us back to the realization that alcohol is not the problem and that addiction is not the problem. Don't leave the room yet. Of course, addiction is a problem. We all understand that firsthand. What I'm referring to is the idea that an addiction is the only problem, when it merely is the end result. Our issue is unmanageability and the desperate need to distract ourselves or cover it up. Bill recognized that the core problem of alcoholism, beyond just the physical addiction, was a profound bondage of self, which is characterized by being trapped by ego, fear, selfishness, and self-centeredness. It represents a false self, or committee in the head that causes irrational fears, dishonesty, and a constant failed attempt to control people and situations to secure happiness. While the body is addicted, Bill emphasized that true recovery necessitates tackling the underlying mental and spiritual obsession of the ego, often calling it the real addiction. This refers to an obsession with self, an extremely egocentricity, fear, in selfishness that drives behaviors like resentment and self-pity, effectively blocking recovery and isolating the person. This is our little picture of lost Lisa. So, speaking of lost Lisa, I am a woman in bondage with chains of suffering. And I spent many years in bondage, completely unaware that I was stuck in hell because of my allegiance to my ego. I spent decades convinced it was coming from the outside world, and this kept me chained to my dysfunctional mind while fighting my surroundings with a vengeance. We had the choice to live in darkness or live in the higher power's light. Easy peasy, fear or faith. It's that simple. The light came on in the parking lot for me, and it has stayed on ever since. Even when I ignore it or try to take the old false control back, the light is still with me. It's unconditional. So looking at step 12, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Spiritual steps showed up as spiritual experiences which culminated into my spiritual awakening. The purpose of the steps came into my realization when my journey through the 12 steps was ramped up to a higher level of awareness, an awareness of the presence in my life that I call my creator. My higher connection happened when I came to the realization that it is done to me, not by me, but not without me. I call this holy relationship co-creation. So Bill compared seeking a spiritual way of life to a rocket ship being propelled into the fourth dimension, into a relationship with the Holy Spirit, our higher power. And what is this fourth dimension that we hear about? In the context of the Big Book, the fourth dimension refers to the profound spiritual experience that transforms an individual's misperception of life, moving them beyond the limitations of addictive suicide and into a state of peace, joy, and faith. This experience, described as a spiritual awakening, is a key aspect of recovery from the unmanageability. 12 precise methodological steps for human transformation so that there can be a radical shift in the way we think, feel, and behave. In finding a power other than ourselves, which doesn't have to mean God per se, but the problem remains. We are powerless. So let's look at the problem of powerless. We start to brush by the word powerless because we hear it so much, we can become almost desensitized to it. The word becomes meaningless, but it's in step 1, and it's an integral part of recovery. We will take a look at process and substance addiction, but more importantly, we'll be looking at unmanageability, as this is the human condition. So here we have the percentages of addictive use. 6 out of 10 people are having a process addiction, which is a behavioral addiction, a compulsive engagement in certain behaviors despite the negative consequences. They include gambling, shopping, excessive internet use, TV watching, being on your phone. All of those trigger a reward in the brain. That's the catch. 1 in 10 is having a substance addiction, which is a chronic relapsing brain disease characterized by compulsive drug and or alcohol or food, seeking and ingesting despite the harmful consequences. 1 in 10 versus, it's actually 6 in 10, 5 in 10 even, let's say, is a huge difference when you think about it. Substance abuse didn't even exist in Bill's day. He probably couldn't even imagine that that's where we were headed. But that seems like where we're headed. We're going to have an unbelievable substance problem in this world, if we don't already. But that's not all human beings. But we all, human beings, suffer from self-will run riot. Addicts happen to be the poster child for unmanageability. But self-will run riot is the human condition. It's not necessarily an addict, it's just being human. In step 10, we see the problem in relation to the body as a pressing problem in addiction. The doctor's opinion is about the allergy of the body. Bill's experience and explanation is that, although this is interesting, it's not the most pressing problem. The most pressing is the problem of the mind. The word allergy may be a bit confusing because we typically think of an allergy as an inappropriate immune response that causes swelling, sneezing, itchy eyes, runny nose, and general misery. Those are symptoms we are more likely to associate with cat hair or shellfish or seasonal allergies than we would with addiction. The use of allergy in the Big Book is idiosyncratic. It is used more generally to mean an abnormal reaction to a substance. People generally understand allergies, and in particular, they understand that an allergy is a reaction to a substance that only affects some people and may have life-threatening consequences. Furthermore, an allergy is not your fault. Although it isn't your fault, you still have to do whatever is necessary to avoid your particular allergens. And I know that I've dealt with a lot of medical people who really get stuck on the allergy terminology, saying, it just doesn't fit. And that's okay. It doesn't have to fit. Take the meaning and move on if it bothers you. It's a word, and it doesn't have to change everything. The problem of the body is once I start, I cannot stop. The problem of the mind is once I stop, I can't stay stopped. Bill promises in step 10 that we are placed in a position of neutrality where we have a protective shield of the spirit. Once we have entered the world of the spirit, our mind is no longer vulnerable to our obsession, and since we won't be inclined to think about our addiction, we are not likely to engage in it. Therefore, the allergy becomes irrelevant because we are placed in a position of neutrality.
I'm sorry, Lisa, what did you say about the problem of the mind again?
So the problem of the mind is once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. Is that the part you're missing, Joel? Or do you want me to reread the whole thing? Okay, that must be it. The problem of the will is the biggest problem of them all. This is a mental obsession, the compulsive and irrational thinking that drives an addict to use despite the negative consequences they'll experience. The will/mind of an addict will manipulate and make excuses to justify using, leading us to believe that this time it will be different, or that we can take control of our addiction. It'll be different this time. Even when aware of the harm using causes, we are unable to resist the urge to use. This obsession blocks our rational thoughts, making it difficult for us to break free from the cycle of addiction through willpower alone. Bill and some of his early AA proponents applied the concept of allergy of the body to codependency by identifying it as a progressive addictive allergy to people and emotional situations rather than a substance. In this framework, the codependent suffers from a compulsive, often self-destructive need to control, fix, or caretake others, leading to a loss of self-identity and personal sanity, mirroring the alcoholic's physical compulsion to drink. Bill W.'s allergy concept, which was actually developed by Dr. Silkworth and the doctor's opinion was to describe alcoholism as a physical inability to stop drinking once started, is applied to process addictions by framing them as abnormal, compulsive reactions to specific behaviors rather than substances. In this concept, the allergy is a metaphorical yet physical loss of control over behaviors like relationships, gambling, spending, eating too much, eating not enough, which, once initiated, produces a phenomenon of craving and a compulsion to continue, mirroring the mechanism of drug or alcohol addiction. This is an admission that we have a physical allergy and a mental obsession. The allergy refers to the physical inability to control using once the addiction is consumed or used. One drink, one morsel of food, one phone call to an ex triggers a powerful, uncontrollable craving for more, making it virtually impossible for the addict to stop. The once I start, I cannot stop experience signifies a complete loss of control over our addiction once the first usage is taken. The addict, despite any intentions or previous resolutions, cannot regulate their usage once it begins. This physical craving is often accompanied by a mental obsession, where the addict's mind is dominated by thoughts of using, even in the face of severe negative consequences and a desire to stop. Controlling the amount consumed or how much we use, such as a process addiction, becomes impossible once the cycle is initiated. That first usage of substance or process sets off the allergic reaction, igniting a craving, generating an insane compulsion to consume more at whatever cost. It is that first hit that does the damage, not the second or even the 10th, because once I start, I cannot stop. Or the alternative, once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. The inability to stop is part of what defines the addict and also refers to the addict's experience of an inability to consistently control their usage once they start. This is the mental obsession and the physical allergy to addiction. And the obsession is a very powerful, recurring thought that drives us to use, behave, or ingest despite the repeated negative consequences. The allergy is the body's and brain's reaction after the first indulgence, leading to an immediate uncontrollable craving and compulsion to continue using more. More drugs, more food, more booze, more people, more drama, video, TikTok, Facebook, drugs. You guys get the idea. Bill talks about how many thousands of men and women have recovered. And notice he uses the word recovered in the past tense. I'm guessing at this point in time, it's more like millions of men and women have recovered. But pay attention to the book. Bill consistently uses the term recovered. And what do you think that means? When Bill says recovered, not cure, he means the obsession to drink or use has been removed and we are recovered from that part. But we must maintain spiritual fitness to prevent a relapse. We're not cured. It shows that the disease is arrested daily rather than eliminated permanently, requiring continued effort. If an individual neglects their spiritual program of prayer, meditation, and helping others, 10, 11, and 12, the obsession can return and most likely will. It's a state of freedom from active addiction, emphasizing the transformative power of the program in achieving sobriety and neutralizing that allergy. Bill emphasized that reaching and maintaining a position of neutrality will require a commitment to a recovery program including the 12 steps and cultivating a strong spiritual relationship. It signifies that while addiction is a chronic relapsing condition, we can experience a daily reprieve from its grip by maintaining a healthy spiritual condition. The reprieve is not a cure, but rather a temporary suspension of the compulsion to drink, contingent on ongoing spiritual practices and a connection with a higher power in order to address our unmanageability. We'll be looking at the body and the mind. When I start, I cannot stop, and when I stop, I cannot stay stopped. Herb says this is the best secret in all the rooms. And most people don't understand the depth of our brokenness. Although my free will is free in some areas, it's not free. It comes with great cost. And Bill termed this unmanageability. Bill says, we're not cured, but we do have a daily reprieve from our addiction, contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. He says we need to apply our way of living, which is a code in the Big Book. When Bill W. refers to our way of living, he is referring to adopting the 12 steps as a daily practical lifestyle rather than just a temporary fix for drinking. It is a complete transformation of attitude, shifting from a selfish, self-centered existence based on self-will to a life centered on spiritual principles, honesty, and service to others. Bill uses the statement, our way of life, or our way of living, more than 20 times in the Big Book. So our way of living is steps 1 through 9 is how we get our recovery. Steps 10, 11, and 12 is our way of staying in that status. Dealing with our spiritual malady, dealing with our unmanageability. On page 64, it says, resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So we begin with spot checking inventory on a daily basis so that we can clear out our channels. And our antidote to unmanageability is the step 10 spot check inventory. It's the formula for clearing out our channel in the moment and at night before we retire on a daily basis. On the spot, when I am disturbed, it is due to misalignment with reality. So I ask myself, how are my feet moving today? How do I look? Meaning, how am I behaving, reacting, treating myself and others? The step 10 check, you can actually, there's an app that you can Google it or get it online. It's the step 10 spot check. And you can put your information in there and you can do it every night if you want, or you can just do it, when you do your praying or you're meditating or whatever. But it's such a fantastic way to do things when you really just check in with your life, with things before they get too far out of hand. So try to do a daily spot 10 check. So you've probably heard of the new pair of glasses that was from Chuck C's book, and it's about the lenses that we've been wearing. They're warped and they show us a skewed sense of reality. Wearing new lenses will show us a new view, not our reality, but a new vision, like with new actual glasses. I have been in a state of self-induced delusion. I have been compulsive, obsessive, fearful even, and on many occasions, my delusions determined my behaviors and actions. I often felt downright out of my mind. I really needed a new pair of glasses. So we clear the channel at night. We connect with our new visions in view until we see it more and more in our daily lives. We clear the channel with the 10-step spot checks in nightly review repeatedly, as this is the antidote to our unmanageable lives and ideas. We are the channel of the higher power, a channel of hope and of light to pass on to others who are also suffering. So we fill our channel with prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact. Bill points Bill's point of step 11 was guidance in the morning to start your day with a check-in with your higher power, to invite your source to guide your day so that we stay in orbit around the light. And I've probably told you this before. In the morning, I look at my calendar, I see what's coming up in my day, and I know which areas might be more difficult than others. And I put them into my intentions to try to have the best day I can have. So then we take all that we have added into our full spiritual container and we give it back. We help a fellow or anyone really. We give what we have also been graciously given. It doesn't have to be monumental. It could be as simple as returning your grocery carriage back to the storefront. Just to be helpful and kind and be grateful to be in the light. This is the formula for living. It's a daily reprieve, and we use this for dealing with our unmanageability. Because our unmanageability is never going to go away. We can't separate it. It's part of being human. But we can bring it down to a very manageable level. So this is the original six steps that came from the Oxford group. It was before the big book was published by Bill. And the founders developed a program of recovery consisting of these 6 steps. The 12 steps, as we know them today, were written especially for the big book, as discussed in Bill W.'s official biography. While writing the big book, Bill came to a place that had been a barrier in his own mind and had given him considerable worry. He had to set down the actual program for the addict to follow, and he wanted to make it as powerful as possible. Bill had a great amount of fear that the message might be misunderstood by addicts in distant places. It was one thing to pass on the message face to face when one could personally observe the other's reactions and be present to respond to objections, questions, or confusion. Once it was in print, there was no second chance. The basic material for the chapter was the word of mouth program that Bill had been talking about ever since his own recovery. It was heavy with Oxford group principles and had, in addition, some of the ideas Bill had gleaned from William James and Dr. Silkworth. Bill had worked with Dr. Bob and other alcoholics in testing and sifting the workability and effectiveness of the early program. While he would be the nominal author of the 5th chapter, he was in fact serving as spokesman for all the others. According to Bill, their word-of-mouth program had thus far been a pretty consistent program containing 6 steps to achieve and maintain sobriety. The Oxford group ideas pervade in these original 6 steps as listed by Bill. Number 1, we admitted that we were licked, that we were powerless over alcohol. Number 2, we made a moral inventory of our defects or sins. Number 3, we confessed or shared our shortcomings with another person in confidence. Number 4, we made restitution to all those harmed by our drinking. Number 5, we tried to help other alcoholics with no thought of reward in money or prestige. Number 6, we prayed to whatever God we thought there was for power to practice all these precepts. So on December 11th, 1934, Bill showed up at the hospital drunk. And on the 12th of December, Ebby shows up and takes him through the 6 steps of the Oxford group. Bill detoxes in the hospital, and on his second day there, he is still detoxing, but having had some exposure to the Oxford group, even though he would arrive there drunk, he did their 6 steps. On the third day, he has this mountaintop spiritual mystical experience, which is on page 14 if you want to read about it. But he feels such defeat. He had been working with alcoholics for 6 months and had not saved a single man. He decides he wants to give it all up and go back to Wall Street. He tells his wife Lois of his decision and how he hasn't gotten a single person to sobriety. She just looks up at Bill with love in her face and love in her voice and says, "Bill, you are sober." For the first time, Bill understood that it wasn't about him getting other people sober. It was about turning from the self-centeredness to other-centeredness, and that would keep him sober because it established a relationship with power. He meets with Dr. Silkworth, who tells Bill to stop with his mountaintop experience and stop talking about God and you and alcoholism. And he says, talk about your powerlessness in your body. Talk about the allergy that once you start, you cannot stop. And about how once you stop, you cannot stay stopped. That everything you tried was not enough. He knew he had been permanently restored to abstinence and that his life's destiny was to help other people. So Bill meets with Dr. Silkworth, who tells Bill, again, to stop talking about that experience. He said, everything you tried was not working. And this is what Bill did. He hit the road with his story and headed for Akron, Ohio. Bill gets very clear about the problem of the mind and describes it on pages 23 to 43, and that he must carry this message to the other alcoholics. So remember my story. I was chained to my suffering and fear. It permeated my every thought and decision. I thought the issue was out in the world, and I even tried to manipulate and change my outer world, quite unsuccessfully. But I was given the gift of overachiever, and I didn't stop trying. And the pain and fear grew, and the dysfunction around me increased, and my self-esteem was at rock bottom. The worst news I got was that I was the source of all this pain. I saw myself as being in bondage. I failed to notice I was the one dragging around my own chains, and they were my creation. But it was the best news also, because if the pain and suffering was in my hands, if I held the chains, then there was something I could do about it. And that was the major turnaround in my life. I accomplished this by doing Bill's turnaround work, and I also incorporated Byron Katie's turnaround for the best outcome. I made the decision and I took the necessary actions that turned my will and my life over to the care of my Creator as I understood that, which is what was my catalyst in surrendering. I spent the time and effort to understand my connection to a higher power, and I questioned the little bit I did have in my spiritual toolbox. For me, spiritually awakening is about growth in my faith of my higher power, the expansion of my knowledge, and broadening my mind by allowing ideas in before judging them. Opening myself up through faith, I am confident that I will be able to survive whatever may come because I am supported by my Creator, and this is my path, the path to freedom, by consistently making an effort to live in the light. And that concludes the PowerPoint. So I hope that was hopeful and helpful for everybody. And if you have any questions or you have any comments, I would love to hear them. So please raise your virtual hand and we can have a little chat about it. Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. Can I go off recording?
Yeah, you want me to turn it off?
Sure.
Okay, hold on.